Good evening, everyone. Before we get started, I would like you to know for your purposes that the gentleman next to me will be referring to me as the great and all-powerful Il Duce for the entire time we're here. Having said that, I would like to call the Instruction Committee meeting for the Frederick County Board to order, and I was joking about that first thing. The date is June 17th, and the time is 6:32. We have an agenda before us, gentlemen. I make a motion, do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
And do we have a second?
Second, oh great and powerful one.
The motion has been made and properly seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any discussion? Agenda passes. I will now pass over to Dr. Hummer and his team, the agenda.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So we have quite a few items to share with you this evening, but I do want to draw attention to the amazing staff that have worked so hard on the Grading Coalition as well as other aspects of this agenda. Thank you all so much for being here, and we greatly appreciate your insight and information, and we will be having them come up and share some additional items with the items on our agenda. So first, we're going to provide you with an update on the Virginia Literacy Act. We will then provide you all with an update on the Elementary and Secondary Grading Coalition and next steps. Then we are going to talk about the Title I Part D, which is going to need to go to the full board for approval, as well as the approval of the SEAC members. That will also need to go to the full board for approval, as well as the request for reconsideration of educational material appeal, and that will also need to go to the full board for approval as well. So of these 6 items, 3 of them will need to go to the full board, Mr. Chair. So with that, I will now hand it over to Dr. Angelo. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hummer. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we have a full agenda. We're aware of the time and aware of our 7 o'clock meeting. We will hustle as much as we can to get through as quickly as we can. So our first agenda item is the Virginia Literacy Act update, and I will call Mrs. Swager up to go through that process.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Dr. Hummer. I'm pleased to be able to share with you some updates related to our Virginia Literacy Act, and I'm going to talk about some of the components in the plan. But before I do that, you'll see on the screen a picture that kind of represents a little bit where we are feeling right now at the elementary level, because everything is always happening at the elementary level, but right now it feels like everything that's happening is also on fire because it's all very urgent. We've had new standards, we have new requirements, we have a lot of new coming down, and so our teachers are juggling a lot right now, and we need to be able to help support them. And the only way we're going to do that is if we all join together and work to provide job-embedded supports for them, as well as to support them through professional learning and making sure that they know that we're here to help and support and kind of guide them through that as best we can. So we want to make sure that we're keeping track of all of those moving pieces and helping our staff through that. In the Virginia Literacy Plan, we need to have a plan for comprehensive communication, and that's based around the literacy vision that we have. We've developed that vision with a committee that has gotten stakeholder feedback and support, and you have access to that vision. So due to time, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that one, but we have been communicating it out, and we will continue to communicate that as part of our plan. We are also required to identify our core materials, our supplemental materials, and our intervention materials as part of the Virginia Literacy Act. We already have our HMH into reading program. We've talked about that. And so that will be the core that all teachers in kindergarten through 5th grade will use in their classrooms. We additionally have to identify supplemental materials, and you see there the ones that are listed are ones that we are currently using in schools across the division to help support additional pieces of that core program. In addition, our English language learners will use the core. They'll also use the supplemental programs that we've identified, and they will be using Imagine Learning for 2nd through 5th graders who are newcomers only, and that's been identified by our English language supervisor. Our special education students will use the core. They'll also use the supplemental materials that are listed. And then we're in the process of determining additional supplemental materials that they may need in order to support their specially designed instruction. Because the state has not completed its lists, we do have the opportunity to list things as to be determined right now. And so we will take that opportunity so that we have an opportunity to do some gap analysis, determine where we might have some needs, and then purchase things with a little bit more time and opportunity to identify exactly what's needed instead of trying to pick things off of a list that we're not really sure about just because we want to get it turned in. So we'll add to be determined in our plan for several areas. Intervention is another area where we will do that. We were already using Spire, which is on the approved list. We are using Bridge the Gap intervention, which is on the approved list. And so all of our students will have access to those intervention programs, and then we'll add additional programs as we learn additional needs and identify areas that we have some gaps.
Mrs. Swager, can I
Yes.
just inject something very quickly to clarify? When we use the term core around the materials, this is not a reference to Common Core curriculum. We use the Virginia standards. Virginia did not adopt Common Core. So when we're talking about core, we're talking about the primary primary material, and then there are supplemental materials along with that. Just wanted to make sure we were clear on that.
Thank you, Dr. Angelo. That's a good distinction. All right, so we also have to ensure that evidence-based reading research training is provided to all teachers. And we have identified the training options through what the state has provided us. There is a Canvas course they've provided. Letters 1 is something that they have said will count, but there's a module that has to go with it. So teachers who have taken Letters 1 will have to take an additional module, and then they will have met the requirement. And then we're still waiting for the Department of Ed to approve whether or not IMSE is going to be counted as what they consider OG training, which is Orton Gillingham training. And if that is approved, then we will have people who qualify for that, and they'll have to take an implementation module as well. All of these trainings are robust. All of them require at least 30 or more hours. Some of them are 90 hours. So it's a lot of training that our teachers have to participate in. It must be completed during the 24-25 school year. We are looking to provide stipends, but we haven't landed on an amount yet because depending upon the different training that they're taking, some of them received all release time to be able to take some of that training. And so they had a sub, they were out of class and they took the training. Some of them did it all on their own time. And so there will be some variances in stipends based upon how folks took that training. We also will provide training in the implementation of high-quality instructional materials, so that program into reading, any of the supplemental materials, that will require training as well. And so on our professional learning days, we'll help support our teachers with job-embedded professional learning. Here's the program you have. Here is how we use these evidence-based instructional practices. Now, how do we combine the two so that our students are getting what they need to get in the classroom? We will also have job-embedded coaching cycles, and we will use walkthroughs in the buildings to help determine how that implementation is going. So not as an evaluative thing, but as a, where are we seeing that we need some support? Where are we struggling? Where are we doing really well? And where do we spend our time in providing that support for teachers? We do need to monitor student assessment and progress. Screening tools help us know who needs additional support. And so VALS is provided by the state. We are required to use it for kindergarten through third grade. They're creating it for 4 through 8. That's not ready yet. We also have the SOL and the VGA, which is the growth assessment for the SOL. And so third through fifth grade will have that, but that's not a diagnostic tool. We will monitor progress, so we'll have things like checks on specific skills, unit tests, formative assessments, that sort of thing. There will be student reading plans that I'll talk about in a moment. And as we go through, this is another area where we will identify additional tools as we know where there are gaps and where we have additional needs. So as we know that we need a diagnostic tool somewhere, then we'll identify what it needs to be about, because there are a lot of different facets of reading, and then we'll determine what's needed and help schools get those tools. We need to assess our division level progress. So how's it going at the division level across the way? So I talked about walkthroughs earlier. Walkthrough data will be one way that we're able to assess how the implementation is going and what that looks like in buildings. We will have assessment results from the standardized assessments, the VALs, the VGA, and the SOL. If we have any additional diagnostic assessments that we purchase, that would be another form of data. But we also have formative assessments that come with the programs that we're using that we can use to help support and determine how students are doing. We do meet with instructional support teams, so all of our leadership teams, we have regular meetings to help determine where needs are there, and we meet with building leaders along the way as well to determine what their needs are at the building level. And finally, we have the student reading plans that all students have to have if they are identified as being at risk or high risk through those assessments. Those plans would be developed in conjunction with the parent input, with reading specialists at the school level, with the classroom teacher, and with any other specialists that would need to be involved. We would make sure that those are communicated with families and that families are up to date on how students are doing and what the results of different progress monitoring would be. And we also would be sharing resources to support literacy with our families. And so the state has provided a lot of really valuable resources that we can share out just from our website or in general, but then additional resources that would be targeted toward the needs of students would be provided to families as they develop those reading plans. So that brings me to the end of a really fast update on the Virginia Literacy Plan or Act and the plan for the Act. If there are no questions, I will move on to the elementary grading recommendations. Yes, sir.
I was wondering, base reading training, what are the subject matters in that program?
In the evidence-based reading,
Yes.
so it's all about literacy. So all of the training is around practices and strategies that would be implemented in classrooms to teach students how to read.
Okay. So formative assessment means what now?
Those are assessments that are done as students are learning things. You're kind of dipsticking to see if they're getting it, checking their understanding. It might be an exit ticket at the end of a lesson. It might be something that they fill out to show how they're doing. But rather than waiting for a big test at the end of something, you're checking assessments along the way.
Okay.
Formative, it's like homework, classwork, and exit tickets, like she mentioned. Summative is where you have the tests and quizzes, and they're weighted differently in the school as far as percentage of grade. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair, just a statement. If people think y'all get the summer off, it looks like you guys have been busy, so hats off to you and the team and everybody involved. So I appreciate it. It's not the way everybody wants to spend their summers, but we appreciate that you guys are unscrambling this knot. So thank you.
Thank you.
Where do you see the assessments right now? Are we improving or are we not improving? Because I just saw the SOL scores. I want to get your opinion on it.
So a lot of the work that we've been doing with literacy is focused on foundational reading skills and strategies, which are in kindergarten, first and second grade. And so that doesn't necessarily show up in our SOL scores. And so we're seeing evidence of students better able to decode and read more on grade level than we have in the past, but that's not necessarily across the board at all sites because the training hasn't been broad scope and across the board everywhere yet. So not all teachers have had that training yet.
Because I wasn't impressed with the numbers I saw. Not at all.
I would venture to say that we all know that there's work to do.
That's it.
All right.
Anything else?
Thank you.
All right, so Grading Coalition recommendations. We will be sharing some information about the Elementary Grading Coalition recommendations, and joining me to do that are Marie O'Connor, who is a teacher at Orchard View Elementary School, Melissa Culp, an instructional coach at Bass Hoover Elementary, Angie Patton, an instructional technology coach at Armel and Apple Pie Ridge, and Jennifer Burke, who is a teacher at Redbud Elementary. And I will let these ladies walk you through our Grading Coalition recommendations.
Good evening. It's down a little. So to start out, as you can see on your screen, the purpose of our coalition, we identified what the purpose of grading we thought was. The main thing is communication. At the elementary level, I think we do a great job of communicating, but those grades are one of the main forms of communication between the school and teacher and the families. Our grades are a point in time. They're not cumulative. It's not average. Grades that we provide our students and their families show how they're performing on certain assignments and the direction that we want to take as a division as a whole. Again, we're trying to get away from averaging and giving parents specific feedback on individual assignments. Speaking of feedback, we want to make sure that all stakeholders, the child, families, teachers, principals, that we all have the feedback so that way you have detailed information on how your child is doing and how that student is progressing. And then we also, a big thing that we wanted to focus on, especially at the elementary level, is a separation between academics and those competencies and learning behaviors. Often a child will perform well academically, but be struggling socially. They might struggle with work habits. So we wanted to make sure that we had a distinction so that way we were targeting the whole child and not just looking at their academic performance. And then these are the reporting labels that we have developed thus far. So our meets the standard, that is the goal. That is what that we hope each student accomplishes, meaning that they are successfully learning what we are going over and they're doing it consistently. So that's the big target there with meets the standard. When we give a child a grade of approaching the standard, they have a basic understanding of the concept. They're almost there, but they're not doing it consistently. They still need support. Progressing towards the standard means there's a partial understanding of the concept, but they're very inconsistent in showing their learning, and they still need a lot of support. And then finally, not yet making progress towards the standard means that the students they're struggling. So they don't have an understanding of what they're teaching. They need significant support from the teacher or outside intervention. So those are the 4 areas that we've identified. And like I said, our goal is to meet the standards. Virginia, we have our standards of learning, and that's what we want our children to meet, all of those standards and then progress to the next level.
So what you're looking at on this screen is sort of a snapshot of what the language arts and the mathematics section of the report card would look like. So the academic achievement label section would be the overall rating that she just mentioned to you, whether it be meeting the standard or approaching the standard or down. We do not rate every single standard because that would be too many to rate at one time. We teach a lot during the course of a quarter. So what you see there are some bullet points. Those are the overarching big ideas or the strands that fall under each academic category. So as a teacher is teaching certain standards, they would click a box next to that to just show that that is the overarching strand that they were teaching during that quarter and assessing. And then the comment section would allow for more personalized information. So this is where a teacher could address some of those specific standards that students were either doing very well with or that they need some additional support with, so that the parents just have a little more detailed and upfront information. On the next slide, this would be the science and the social studies portion of that as well. It would work exactly the same as the reading and the math. So we would just have a teacher click on the bullet point of the big idea that they had been teaching during that quarter or big ideas, and then additionally add comments of what students were doing well with and needed additional support with.
All right, so, sorry, I'll get closer, sorry. So like we said in the purpose of grading, we separate the academic content from the learning behaviors. And so we came up with these learning behaviors that we want all students to exhibit. We used our Portrait of a Graduate and our Inspire continuums to help come up with some of these behaviors. Self-regulation, and you can see the bullet points kind of showing some examples of how students can use self-regulation to help build those interpersonal skills. Work habits, following directions, setting goals. These are very similar to what we already have under our work habits. Next, we move into how they really work with others and work to help build their community. So you have citizenship, and then, of course, collaboration, and how, and again, you'll see through some of these bullet points, communication, flexibility, responsibility, all of those things kind of from our portrait of a graduate that we've woven in. So teachers will be giving a label just like the academic content. Every student will have that. And then underneath, we plan on having a comment section so teachers can then give some personalized comments on how the student is performing.
And our plans for moving forward for next year. We need to talk with Infinite Campus and see what that will look like and how they can combine what our goals are for what a new report card looks like to something different so that we don't have to write every single thing. We'll have training in Q2. The people that have been on the Grading Coalition will start with doing both report cards, just the traditional one that most parents are familiar with, and then the new one, so that way we can have more communication and kind of teach those parents and ourselves to kind of get bugs out. Then in Q3, we'll have a focus on a pilot school, hopefully. And then so one school will do it as in continuous with the coalition that's also still continuing, because if you notice, there is maybe 1 or 2 teachers from each school. So we just want to make sure that every school has some sort of grade or class that is able to see the new report cards, because we don't want to leave anyone in the dark. After Q3, when we focus on the pilot schools, Q4, we're going to add more schools to those new report cards, because we figure parents' word of mouth normally is a little bit better, because they'll see that, oh, we're going to have more information given. It won't just be, oh, they got an A. Why did they get meets the standards? It'll be more specific, and it will help the parents see how their child has grown or what they can work on with them.
And so then our goal would be by the year 25, 26, we would have a new grading and reporting system. So if there are no questions for elementary, then I'll turn it over to Dr. Myers for secondary. But did we have any questions?
Questions for elementary?
Just a comment for elementary. I think, and I know I don't want to take your thunder, Dr. Myers, but I think this will work great in elementary, because we can, give that information to those parents as far as where their students are excelling and where they're falling short. And I really appreciate the way we're implementing it over a time period and everything, not just throwing it in there all at once for the parents to try to figure out. I think that's a great approach to it. My concern is, are we throwing the baby out with the bathwater on this? Where we have a traditional look and parents can call up and have that conversation with the teacher, rather than just saying, all right, this is unsatisfactory, or this is not meeting the standard, or, this child's really struggling here. I'm curious to see how it's going to work. That's about it, but thank you.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, I think that's why we're piloting next year with both, so that parents can get the comparison in those schools that are piloting, the classrooms that are piloting, so that they can understand what the difference is, and that will give us feedback as to how we communicate better in terms of what this actually looks like and what it means. And also, it'll give us feedback if there are any adjustments or tweaks that we need to make.
So with that, Dr. Angelo, if we're not seeing any improvements at the elementary level, we're going back to the traditional standard? Or is this, I guess, where did this come from? Where did this idea spark from?
Well, there's a lot of research behind this practice.
I understand it, but we have a lot of research for every new program that ever pops up, and I don't know if a lot of research is somebody trying to sell us a new textbook, a new program, or something else, but there's always a lot of research behind it. That's always the standard that we get. I just want to make sure that this is something that will be effective, and if it's not effective, we get rid of it.
It's better communication to families and kids and teachers as to the progress of the students. And so, we'll just have to take a look at it and see. I mean, down the road, we'll see how that plays out, but it stands to reason that better communication about where the student is progressing with more specific information as to what they're progressing well on and what they're not progressing well on would certainly improve student learning and parent engagement. I would argue that I think this will bring about more conversations between parents and teachers.
And I agree with you. Communication is key, especially, in the early stages of childhood education. So like I said, I'm excited to see where this goes, but I don't want it to be something that we just beat our heads over against the wall with for years, trying to get it to continue to work. And, we're stuck in a system that doesn't work.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I can add to that, thank you, Mr. Atkins, for that question. Two additional things I would add to what Dr. Angelo is saying is the first is you asked where this came from. This came in collaboration with our elementary schools. As you can see, this amazing staff that has worked through this. This isn't something that Dr. Angelo and I sat down and said, let's put this together and hopefully this works. That's not how we operate, and that's never how I want to operate. So this was in collaboration with our principals, with our staff, in regards to what this needs to look like. If we would have sat down with our staff and they would have said, you know what, we kind of like the A, B, C, D, E, F model for our elementary school students, we would have continued with that if they had the support and the data that supported that. But this is moving us in the direction of essentially what's called the standards-based report card, which a large majority of school divisions are using this for elementary school students. We're one of very few that does not, because again, that standards-based report card is going to provide a breakdown of each of those standards and those subject areas for the parents and for the students and for the teachers, so that they can see each of those areas instead of just seeing math A, English A. It's going to say math, number sense, this is your score, and those breakdowns with notes. It's going to have fractions, a breakdown, and then as the one young lady mentioned, they're not going to teach all of those in every single 9 weeks, so it's going to be manufactured in a way so the parents can process that, but more importantly, our staff can process that so that we can help move our students forward to what Mr. Sturdivant said earlier, so that we can start moving that needle for our kids, so that we're able to identify those areas. So I am right there with you with that angst, Mr. Atkins. This is the last thing we want to do, is just continue to put our staff through stuff that's not working. But I can share with you that us just doing an A, B, C, D, E, F for elementary school students is not working. And we've seen the standards-based working, and it's not selling of a product. Like, this isn't, all right, now that we're doing this, now you have to pay for this product. Like, it is not the case here. So I share that sentiment with you wholeheartedly, and that's the last thing that we want to do to our staff, and we want them and the parents to direct us in regards to, hey, this is working, we need to change, or no, you know what, I think this is really working, we need to continue to do it. So I definitely share that sentiment with you. Just wanted to add those two pieces.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I would also add that as a parent and not a teacher, although I'm both, as a parent, I'm fortunate to have two children that are do very well in school. But if there's an issue with what they were not able to accomplish, just getting a B on their report card, we wouldn't really know what it is that they were failing to do. And having that deeper information would help us to help them, and have that communication from the teacher where you don't necessarily have to call. You would have it in black and white written out for you. So I would advocate that we do give this its due diligence. And, I think it's a good idea, quite frankly, especially since you're looking at the whole student and not just academics, because you can have a student who achieves all A's, but they're citizen and what's the other, being able to work with others. Collaboration could be absolute crap. Sorry, I used that word again. Hopefully it doesn't make the paper this time. But I'm a middle school teacher, and as a teacher, I've had students this year who overachieve in A's, but their citizenship and collaboration is in the tanker. It's horrible. And so the parents need to know that. Well, my kid's getting all A's, what's the problem? Well, here's the problem. We want to make the best and most well-rounded student we can. So Anyway, questions over there? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So at the secondary level, and this is also in speaking to that, that's why we're very methodical in this process. That's why we're not going too fast, because we know that we need to experiment with it, pilot it. We will make mistakes, so we need to fix them as we, move along. But we don't want to make mistakes, for our kids. And so we don't want to get ourselves buried into something and not be able to recover from it. So we're making sure by our intentionality, our pacing, that we have time to practice in that. So at the secondary level, we're going to highlight what we as a coalition decided was the purpose of grades, the learning habits rubric, and then an implementation timeline so that you can see what next fall, this summer and next fall is going to look like. And we, of course, will give you updates as we make our way through the process. I'm fortunate today to have two of my colleagues with me, Ashley Yetzen from Sharando, getting ready to move to Admiral Byrd as a civics teacher, and then Kindred Spirit. And then Dr. Simmons, Marcy Simmons, who's the assistant principal at Ayler Middle School. Our purpose of grading, as you can see there, is to communicate student achievement towards specific standards so they'll know exactly what standards they're doing well on and which ones that are areas of needed growth at a certain point in time. So where are they in October is not going to be where they are with that standard come the spring. So we're going to be able to track that. It should reflect what a student knows and is able to do. So it's not only knowledge, but it's a skill set that's developed over that time. They will receive separate feedback on their habits. Like Mr. Bell said, as far as collaboration, responsibilities, those are just as important. We are going to report them separately so they have the exact same level of significance and communicate to the parents, because we know we're looking at the whole child. We're not just looking at a letter grade, a number grade, we're looking at the big picture there. So that's the advantage of spreading those out or separating them out. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Yetzen, who's going to talk about our learning habits rubric, which we just did finalize. And so we will enjoy we will be implementing that in the fall as a pilot. It'll just be with a few classrooms, both at middle and high.
So as you can see, this is something new, especially at the secondary level, to be able to look at the non-cognitive competencies as well as the learning habits for our students. So very similar to the elementary, we have designated 5 categories as well as a scale to be able to measure where our students are regarding those learning habits. So we are looking at roles of responsibility, independent work, self-regulation, organization, as well as collaboration. And again, the bulleted points are a general breakdown of things that we are looking for as we are working with our students quarterly. And so this will be an opportunity for us to be able to provide that more specific feedback instead of the general comments that you may traditionally see on a report card of how a student is doing work habit-wise. This offers an opportunity for us to be able to provide more personalized feedback even at the secondary level for our students. And as Mr. Bell had said, teaching a secondary level, you may have a student who is demonstrating A work in terms of content, but some of the behaviors and learning habits are where we need to be able to provide that more personalized feedback to parents to help them continue to achieve and grow.
Especially this 8th grade year.
Absolutely.
Yes, middle school.
I'd like to add to that as well. I think it offers us the opportunity to share with parents who maybe their student is struggling when it comes to grades. Maybe they have a C in math, but they collaborate well with others. They work independently. They, take initiative. And so it allows us to say to a parent, they are doing some things really well. Maybe the math content is hard for them and we're working on that. But what they're doing, that is a lifelong skill is really important to know as well for parents. Mm-hmm. So for our timeline, In August, we're going to begin piloting the learning habits rubric that we just showed you with a few classrooms at the middle school and high school levels. We're going to form a parent and student advisory committee because we think it's important to hear from our students and our parents about what matters to them, what they want to see, what they gauge when they're looking at a grade, what it means to them. Also, we're going to continue our grading coalition work. So we'll be, and then September into November, providing professional learning for our teachers so they understand the changes that are happening, what we're looking for, what we're working on. We're also going to be providing professional learning for parents so that they understand when they're looking, as you were saying, they're looking at a different type of report card. What does this mean? Why is this important? And so helping to really improve that communication. And then, of course, continuing with that grading coalition work where we're going to start looking at our grading scale and class rankings. And really, we're looking across the state to see what's happening across the state of Virginia. And then make some recommendations to you all in December of 2024. And then in the spring of 2025, we're looking at, of course, providing more professional learning for teachers, expanding the use of the learning habits rubric, and communicating with all stakeholders about the changes that are happening.
Any questions for us?
Does this line up with the book that you gave me earlier in the year?
It does.
Okay.
Very much so. And we're hoping to have another session with Dr. Gusky on September 23rd is our hope. And we're going to invite each of you because he has really taught us a lot over the past year in this area. He's been working in this realm for 30 years, so he has a lot to offer us.
Thank you.
There is one thing that I would love to see more information on regarding the secondary grading timeline and the secondary grading or change is you mentioned that you're going to make the grading scale and class rank to us, the school board. I would wonder or like to see how it looks or how it relates to students and how, basically how colleges and universities view it. I think that's important because they're looking at grade point averages right now.
Right.
For the most part.
Right.
They look at SAT scores, they look at recommendations and so forth, but I wonder how this stacks up to the current way that it's being done, and if there is going to be a numeric value to that student's, especially those that are taking AP that are above 4.0, how that's weighted in this process as well. So that's something that I have a slight concern about.
And those are all the things that'll be part of this next step. We've already started looking that direction as far as what I've already started researching what universities and colleges in Virginia and beyond. I've done a sample of what are they looking for as far as norming the GPAs. Looking at the acceptance rates. NCAA is a big area for secondary schools that we need to make sure that we're not in any way disadvantaging our students by any changes we make. Many school divisions in Virginia are ahead of us in this area, and doesn't mean that we need to be doing what everybody else is doing. We do have models out there that we can benefit from because we can benefit from what they did well and what they could have done better. And so our goal will always be to do that research to make sure we're trying to avoid some of those pitfalls. That will be what you just mentioned, Mr. Bell, be a huge part of what we're doing next fall. And I want to make sure that parents are part of that process as well, because they need to see, what does a Virginia Tech, what are they looking for? If a child has a 4.8, what does that mean to them if they're in one division versus another division?
Right. Well, I would like to see if you could send us, the full board, the models of what you've been looking at so we can take a look at them and get a better understanding of how it's going to be transitioned and transferred.
Yes, I'll be happy to.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right.
Please.
I think Mr. Bell gets an A for collaboration, or however we're grading it now, because I think he looked off my paper. Because I had a couple questions. Ms. Simmons brought up the rankings. I think we've kind of hit that. But when we talk about those intangible skills, right? Working together, collaboration again. or, you know, showing up on time, putting forth effort, you know, organization, all that other stuff. I think it's great that we're looking at that as the whole student, you know, because these are the intangibles that I need in the workforce. But, you know, you kind of hit on it, Dr. Meyer. How are we going to let that translate to a GPA when colleges are looking at that, when other folks are looking at that? And are we disadvantaging any of our students that might have a special need? Maybe they're autistic and they can't collaborate with other students. Are we just going to give them a 0 because it is a
Right.
standard right there?
And so the learning habits would not receive a letter grade or any kind of numeric grade. It would be feedback. So that would never have a score.
So the student's GPA would still be A, B, C, D, and F?
Well, GPA is still
Right.
going to be calculated on, you know, the 4-point scale.
Right.
So that will not change. So our students won't be disadvantaged as far as the actual GPA. They would still get that. What we're going to be looking at are the scales. So the 100-point scales. There are various models out there, and those are things that we're going to be working diligently on over the next several months, because we really need to do our research in those areas so we don't make the mistakes. But just to let you know, as far as GPAs are concerned, you will not see a difference in that. Students will still get, you know, a 3.5, a 2.6, things like that. Students with disabilities, the accommodations, the grading scales, all of those will be exactly what they have right now. We're just going to be looking at better consistency between classes, between grade levels, and those are the areas that we're going to really be focused on, because there is a lot of subjectivity in grading. And we'll never completely get away from that. But as much as we can do to minimize it for the sake of the child, that's incumbent upon us to do that. So those are the areas that we'll be working on. But no, we will not. At the secondary level, we must have a GPA because for what happens next.
So let me ask you this. I'm dyslexic. And I have a problem reading. It takes me forever. I have to read a page a couple times so I can start to comprehend it. And, you know, I put a lot of effort in when I was in school to do that, but I would still end up, you know, with a B or a C, you know, no matter how hard I tried. Now, take Mr. Bell. I'm not saying you did this, but let's say Mr. Bell's great at reading, right? He aces all of his tests. He can tell you Aristotle's definition of tragedy and just write that thing down word for word, right? And then, but he doesn't have to put a lot of work in. He's got a high IQ, you know, so he's failing at his homework and everything else. So GPA-wise, we both have a C, but he's failing at his intangibles, right?
Right.
His effort and everything, and my effort's way up there. Does that put me above him?
No, so the way that would work is, again, with the non-cognitive learning habits, that's personalized feedback that would be provided. Now, if a student doesn't do his homework, that can have a natural consequence in a child's grade.
Right, he went from an A to a C.
Yeah, so if, as a parent, I'm looking at my son's report card, and I had an 8th grader boy once upon a time.
Me too.
And so when I'm looking at that and I'm getting feedback, well, he's not completing his homework. Well, you drop from a B to a D. Why? Well, because he wasn't mastering the standards. He didn't have the skill set to be able to do it. So they can go hand in hand. It's important to us to look at the whole picture. And that's the benefit of separating the habits from the academic part. What we will advocate for is that those habits, the scoring of those habits, and Dr. Gusky, who we are learning from, we advocate that goes in the permanent file for the student. So if they're going off to college and they see, hey, look, you know, this child may be a C student as far as GPA, but they have all the intangibles, you know, the life skills, the interpersonal skills that we must have, and that's what determines success in many cases. So that would go with them.
All right, cool. I appreciate it. Thank you for the clarity.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll keep you posted as we make our way, and we'll work on that research.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Other questions?
You guys covered all mine, so I think you saw my tell coming their way. So thank you, Dr. Meyer, for covering.
I was thinking of you.
It's that
when I
collaboration
asked that.
again.
Great minds, love it.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to Title I, Part D. I know in May you heard a lot about different grants under Title I, so I'm going to hit the highlights. I know your public awaits you. So
you're
Title
fine.
I, Part
Take your
D
time.
grant is a grant that is provided for our at-risk youth. The beneficiary of this grant, where the fiscal agent, is Timber Ridge. And Timber Ridge is because the neglected and delinquent students, they qualify because they're on Frederick County property, is how they're the beneficiaries. So we coordinate with them. Students could be placed there through the IEP team, through FAPT, which is our Family Assessment Planning team, or through a court order. And that's how they would end up then being placed at Timber Ridge. So our funding is not locally allocated funds. Again, these are all funds coming from DOE, and our beneficiaries are students here in Frederick County. They could be Frederick County Public School students. They may or may not be. Timber Ridge is a private school that houses students from a variety of divisions. And then here's a breakdown of our funding. Our measurable objective, tuition reimbursement. Measurable Objective 2, those are all related to Study Island and Imagine Learning, or different skills to help students. The Cooter Navigator is a career inventory to help students identify where they want to go and what supports do they need to get there. Our virtual reality equipment and software, I know we talked about this a little bit, and Mr. Atkins might remember when we talked about the forklifts, some of the funds were used for a virtual forklift for the CTE program, so they can practice actual hands-on. And then also we have welding equipment that was purchased at $22,000. That's our total that we received from the state and that was spent. So that's a little breakdown for Title I, Part D. Questions on that one? I'll back up real quick to see if there's any questions.
Gentlemen?
Just a question, and I guess it's kind of a little bit off topic of Title I, but with some of the stuff that we support out at Timber Ridge, can our CTE students take advantage of that?
So they're a private school, and they just are housed in Frederick County on their land.
Yeah, I'm just trying to access it since we are giving them a little bit of money, so.
Yeah, the money is allocated from the state. We're just the fiscal agent, so it's not locally allocated funds.
10-4, appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely. Okay,
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
sure.
Good evening. I have one item for you this evening that will require action. In your board docs, you should see the approval of the SEAC members for the 24-25 school year. Our SEAC met on April 22nd, and the names that you have before you are all the individuals that they reviewed, the schools they represent, and I draw your attention to our student, who is Emily Smith from Millbrook High School. She's a rising junior. Her application was very well done, and the committee was very impressed with her advocacy. So that's the one action item you'll have for this evening for this.
Any questions? Thank you. And finally, our request.
Take action on that one.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to recommend to the full board that we approve the SEAC members for the 2024-2025 school year.
There's been a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes to the full board.
Mr. Chair, do you guys want to go back and approve the Title I to the full board as well, so we can knock those out?
Sure.
Yeah.
We need a motion to send Title I Part D to the full board.
All right, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that the full board consider Title I Part D.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion goes to the full board. And our last is the request for reconsideration of educational materials. Do we have someone?
That would be me.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Dr. Hummer. So this will ultimately be an action item for the committee and the full board. We'll start out as information for initially. So there were 4 books that were identified for reconsideration by a parent in the community. The first book was A Court of Thorns and Roses. We do not have that book in our libraries. We did at one point. It hasn't been in our libraries for some time, and through the what we call the weeding process of books, that has now been removed from the list, even in Destiny, which is our system. Crank by Ellen Hopkins, which we do have in all three of our high school libraries, and that has been reviewed, so we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Lucky is in the same situation as A Court of Thorns and Roses. It doesn't exist in our libraries. It did at one point. It's not there anymore. Lost, not returned, whatever the issue is, it hasn't been there for a while. And so that has also been removed through the weeding process. Neither one of those had terribly high circulation rates anyways. And then the last book, On the Bright Side, I'm Now the Girlfriend of a Sex God. I am not actually, but that's the title of the book. So that one, the request for reconsideration that was initially
Somebody's
submitted
retiring.
has been withdrawn. Mr. Bell, I'm just trying to keep up with your humor, sir. So those are the four books that we looked at. The only one that we actually went through the review process with was Crank. So let's just talk about the process. The request for reconsideration was received on March 22nd of 2024. Committee of 7, which included 4 parents and 3 staff, was formed at each of the 3 high schools. So there was a total of 21 committee members. These were done separately because the book exists in all 3 high schools. So each high school had 4 parents from that school community and 3 staff members from that school community. So that was formed within 10 working days, which is what our regulation states. Just keep in mind that spring break was in there, so there was a gap from the time they started that process to the time they finished that process due to spring break. The initial meetings were held on either April 18th or 19th. That depended on the school. We don't drive that process, by the way, at the school level. That's driven by our regulation, which is based on your policy, but that is 100% driven at the school level by the principal. So they received the book. They went through the process. The book reviews were completed at each high school. The final meetings happened somewhere between May 14th was the very first one. June 3rd was the very last one. It was a busy time of year, so they got through them as quickly as they could. I will say, interestingly, and we've been taking notes on some things we may want to tweak in our regulation as we've gone through this process. There is a timeline for identifying the committee. There is no timeline for actually going through the review process, probably something we need to tighten up. So per policy 304P, which is your policy, and then the regulation that accompanies that, a private vote was taken, and the 3 options that exist at each level, but at the school level, at the division level, at your level, the committee level, as well as the board level ultimately, was to either retain the material with restrictions or modifications, or withdraw the material. So across the 3 high schools, 57% roughly voted to retain with no modifications or restrictions, 42.9, so about 43% voted to retain with restrictions, and there were no votes to remove. So after the school level process and that information was communicated, there was an appeal. So this is where your action item is. And again, going through the process, the appeal was submitted on May 22nd. The appeal process was initiated the morning of May 23rd, and that started with me. I met with our supervisor of English and Libraries, who's actually here, Amy Hall, in the audience. So a division level committee was formed within 10 working days. Again, that's all part of the regulation. That was comprised of 11 members. That was 7 parents and 4 staff members. I will say, and kudos to Ms. Hall, she contacted, I think, 24 parents in that ballpark, and 7 of those parents that she contacted agreed to participate in the committee. And those were represented from all 3 of the high school communities. We focused only on high school because this book doesn't exist at any other level. On June 12th, the committee met to discuss the merits, the questions, and concerns of the book. Again, that's all part of the regulation. And per policy and regulation, once again, the same three options existed for this committee. And that committee voted and met for about 75 minutes. And that committee voted 100% to retain the material without restrictions or modifications. There were no votes to restrict or to withdraw the material. So what your action is today as a committee is to either uphold the recommendation of the committee, which is to retain the resource without restrictions or modifications. However, you do have the option as a committee to retain the material with restrictions or modifications or to withdraw the material altogether. That would be your recommendation to the full board. So you can't do that at the committee level. You can only make that recommendation to the full board. And then the full board will also have the same three options. So I hope I explained the process and the regulation well for you. If you have any questions about that or about anything else related to this process, I'm happy to answer that. And what I can't answer, I would ask Ms. Hall to come up and answer.
Thank you, Dr. Angelo. Do we have any questions, comments from the board, from the committee?
Question. What was the complaint actually about in the book?
The complaint that was...
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the book.
So the initial complaint was sexually explicit material, and then there were follow-up concerns around drug use.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were, the real focus, honestly, was from the complaint was sexually explicit material. But because a subsequent communication that was shared with all three committees at the request of the requester, as well as the division level committee, they certainly took a look at the drug aspect of the book as well.
Mr. Chair, if I may ask a question, if that's okay. Dr. Angelo, is this book currently listed as indicated that it has sexually explicit content in Destiny for checking books out?
Because it was flagged initially during our first go. So it is listed on our website.
So not any student can just check this book out if the parents had opted that their child not access these sexually explicit books, that they wouldn't be able to do that, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So then, point of clarification, it currently has a restriction on it.
It does, but they didn't make any recommendation for a further restriction. We have to...
What would be a further restriction?
Putting a sticker on the book to identify it as being mature content, something to that effect.
I see.
They didn't honestly even get to the point of identifying that. That was initial conversation. There were some ideas tossed around, but there was nothing that was recommended.
One school did recommend that.
They recommended...
Putting the sticker on there.
Correct, the sticker on it.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments?
If I may.
I suppose.
Il Duce. The requester is myself, so that's already known. The reason that this was done was when I got the list of books from Supervisor Graver during the campaign last year. This book was listed as NC-17, which means adult content only. Having looked at several of those books on there, like they said, most of those books are gone, and the one with I'm a Sex God, I withdrew my objections to it because after researching it a little bit, I found that some of the things that I initially thought were not correct, British author, some of those things didn't quite translate into American, so I withdrew my objections to that book. The objection that I had with this book, and sexually explicit, to be honest with you, the portions of the book that I read were not necessarily what I would call explicit, but it was the overall content, and nationwide that book has been targeted to be removed, and it has been removed. I read somewhere that she is one of the most banned authors in the country, and that book has been removed from I don't know how many libraries. So my initial reason for doing this was that it was adult content, and that was why I made the stand that I made. So just a little clarification there.
Thank you, Mr. Sturdivant. If I may clarify something. So books currently are not rated by the same 2 letters or 1 letter that movies are rated by. The NC-17 is not a rating that books tend to get, or R or G or what have you. Those are specifically for movies. So I'm not sure where that came from, but I just want to make that point of clarification. I'm not saying that it doesn't warrant that if this were a movie. I'm just saying that it's not a correct moniker for what's inside of the book. And that being said, do we have questions from over yonder?
I am very curious, Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm very curious what the circulation rate of this book is. Is it popular?
It's not an overly popular book, no.
Okay. And just to make sure I understand, should a parent want their child not to have access to this book, they would have the option to fill out this sexually explicit form online.
That's correct.
And then their child would not be able to check this book out of the library.
That is correct.
Okay. How many, I know it was brought up in a previous instructional committee meeting, but I think it has merit here to bring it up again. How many students are on that list?
I am hesitant to answer that question without the information in front of
Okay,
me, but
that's
I
fair.
can tell you it was a very small number.
I believe it was 4 or 8 something.
Yeah, it might have been
It was
8.
less than. It was less than
Dr.
15.
Angelo, yeah, Miss Amy.
Across the division.
20 to 24 students out of 14,000. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
So just
So-
to make double extra sure, as a parent, if you do not want your child to read this book, you can go through the process, which is on our homepage, to fill out the sexually explicit. Basically, no, my child not. I do not want my child having access to sexually explicit books, and this would be one of them.
That's correct.
Correct.
So I want to make a point of the conversation that occurred at the division on the division level committee, and that is that they didn't feel as if the book needed any restrictions. That's why they voted to retain without restrictions. They did, however, say perhaps quarterly reminders to families, frequent mention in newsletters. Hey, if you want your student to opt out of certain books, here's the process, here's the link. Just to put it in front of people more frequently through the year, which Ms. Hall and I thought was a terrific idea and an easy thing to do.
So I think that's a great idea. Is
Agree.
that something that we need to vote on? Is that something,
No, that's
is that
not
something you can implement?
That's a
amazing
process
idea.
that we can
Yeah,
do by simply talking to Ms. Helkowski and saying, hey, Ms. Helkowski, we want to make sure we do this, and it'll get done.
Yes, please.
More work on the table.
Yes.
Mr. Chair. So when I'm looking at this, at first I was thinking, with restrictions, and then I kind of read what Mr. Bell showed me, and I, to Mr. Sturdivant's point, yeah, if the overall arching theme of the book is that way, yeah, maybe there should be some restrictions. However, I'm hesitant because, to Ms. Klein's statement, parents can go in there at any time. And if we put a sticker on there, I mean, when I was in high school, I think during the Bush administration, they put all the labels on the CDs, the M&M CDs and everything. Guess what I bought first?
Yeah.
I mean, so
That was Tipper Gore.
Tipper Gore. I was thinking Steve Scalise for
the
some reason,
PMRC.
but- Yeah, Tipper Gore. Thanks a lot. And he actually did a rap thing about that. But now it's going off my head. Thanks.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that's just another way of advertising it. But I do like the idea that Ms. Hall and Dr. Angelo have been kicking around about getting that in front of the parents out there, reminding them. While I want us to provide safe access to every resource that there is out there, and there are some books out there that should not be in schools 100%. I believe that, with everything else, even back to the COVID days, back in the dark times, we talked about it should be a parent's choice. And I believe this is another reason this should be a parent's choice. I believe that we have a good system in place, but advertising it might be a little bit, could be worked on a little bit better. So with that, I would like to make a motion.
Before that, I have a few things to say about the book. So I read it. This is the book. It took me 2 days to read it because it's in poetry verse. You can see that honestly, the bigger question is, why did she kill so many trees for this little bit of writing? But what I found the book to be was very interesting and a tool for parents to talk with their kids about drug use. Specifically, in this case, they're talking about crank, which is a slang term for methamphetamine. However, to both Ms. Klein's and Mr. Miles' point, it should be the parent's choice. Therefore, by putting a restriction on it like it currently has, gives the parents that choice. They should have the choice as to whether or not they want to speak with their children about drugs through reading a book, or whether or not they want to speak to their children through some other methodology. So I don't have an issue with it having a restriction. I think it would be a travesty if we removed it, simply because we would be eliminating that choice for the parents. And honestly, after reading this, I'm going to encourage my daughter and my son to read this because of how easily this particular drug or any other drug could send a student down that slippery slope. Just a bit of background, the person who this book is about is loosely based on Ms. Hopkins' daughter, and she visits her father for 3 weeks and basically descends into drug addiction. And it talks about all of the things in verse of what she went through and how she felt while doing so. Is it in your face and specific? No, they use flowery language to do that, but it doesn't take a genius to figure out what it is they're talking about. So all of this being said, I think I would like to move it forward to the full board with the current restriction that it has and not adding any additional restriction to it per Mr. Atkins' point that if you put a sticker on it, it tends to say, hey, look at me. So that being said, we have a motion.
We don't have a motion yet. I haven't made it all.
All right. Would you like to?
If I may, before you make the motion.
Yes, sir.
And the point made about giving the parents a quarterly update would satisfy the complainor.
Perfect.
I'm not trying, I know I was called the kook Christo-fascist, and I don't know who said that, but thank you, because I really love that name. But I'm not here to ride my white cowboy hat, my horse and yeehaw, roughshod all over this. I just saw that this book didn't need to be in the hands of children, and I still believe that. But as long as there's, and I'm going to say that I didn't know about that list, this process 2 years ago. That's my own fault for never looking into it, but I never thought about it. So if that is something that we're going to do in policy, then the complainor would have no complaints or objections concerning that book, as long as parents know that the stuff is in there and they have a way to opt out of having their children safe from that kind of stuff. I'm not here to push my agenda on anyone. That has never been my objections, but as long as that thing would come into play, then the complainor would remove his objections.
Mr. Chair, if I may. Oh, go ahead. Ms. Martin, you go first.
I've been waiting. Is there any way that we can categorize some of these books so that when a parent goes in, because I'm sure there's lots of books in our libraries, correct?
Correct, yes.
Is there any way that they can be categorized so that a parent can know that it's a science book, it's a history book, or if it has content that might be more explicit, that they can look at those books particularly?
So that's a great question. And just to clarify what's on our website, there's a I'm going to call it, for lack of a better term, because I'm sure there's a more technical term for this, but I'm going to call it a button that you click on the website that says sexually explicit materials.
Okay.
And when you click on that, you can look by division, you can look by individual schools, and the only thing you see in that list is the sexually explicit materials. You don't see a whole list. And I'm glad you asked the question because it would be overwhelming. And how in the world would I possibly know what is and isn't?
Exactly.
So the list only shows those books that meet the criteria that is well defined by Virginia Code for being sexually explicit. In addition to that, I believe, have we provided access to Destiny, the library software, that also shows every book that we have in a library. But those are two separate lists.
Right.
So you're one list of every single book, and in the high school libraries, I'm guessing there's probably in the ballpark of 5,500 books or something like that. I mean, it's a lot of books.
Right.
But on the sexually explicit list, it's only the books that meet the criteria defined by code that a parent can opt their child out of. One of them, 10 of them, all of them.
Right.
They can do it, all of them, all at once if they want to with a single check of a box.
Okay.
Great question, and thank you for allowing me to provide that information to the community.
So I have a question for Dr. Hummer.
Yes, sir.
The complaintor sitting next to me has removed his complaint from this book. Does this need to go to the full board still?
I would recommend it does because I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he said that he would be appreciative of that if we do move forward with that. So I would recommend we do. Also, there was also a lot of work that was put into this, rightfully so. So I think it would be good to finish out that process and to be done with it. That would be my recommendation.
Sure.
So if I may, Dr. Angela, did you want to
No,
add to
I was
that?
just going to say, I feel like we have to conclude the process.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
the,
it's already
the
in the
process
agenda.
is in
This
process.
was just me for informational sake, not an
appreciate that.
agenda sake.
Yeah, I would. I do want to add one other quick thing on the same note that what Mrs. Martin had just mentioned. Two parts to that. The first is, yes, we have that list of books. Yes, you can access it on Destiny. If there is a book that's out there that's currently not on the list and a parent sees it or a student sees it, we can add it to the list. Now, hopefully we've caught all of those books and we don't have that situation, but if there is, it can always get submitted through a process to be added to the list. The second thing is, and this is previous conversations, we're working on a one-pager that's going to have all of this information on for a process. Communications is currently putting that together and it'll be ready to go live here shortly. And on that, we can also add how to access Destiny, how to access this information, and then we will continuously share that one-pager out through our communications with the community and with the staff, and we're more than happy to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Hummer. Any other comments or questions?
I have a question.
Point of interest, this whole issue was brought upon us because there was a list of 4 books. One became the focal point. The other 3 books were not found in the library. Are they still on the list?
No.
Okay,
No,
so
once they are
they
removed from
dodged
the-
the bullet and they can go back into the library?
No,
and people
no.
can.
No. They would be on the list. So,
Okay.
so no, absolutely not. And they had low circulation. There's no intention of any of our librarians to replace those books.
The sex guide?
Right.
Right.
So two
there's
of them.
2 that were removed,
Correct.
there's 1 that stays, and then based on the will of the board, this one will stay or not. So
That's
just
correct.
want to be clear, of the 4 books, 2 are removed,
Yep.
1 staying, and then pending school board approval, this one will stay as well.
But they're all on the list.
No.
Well, if we don't have it in our libraries, then it's not on our
Being
list.
removed.
But if we were to get it, it would go on the list. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
Well,
And
someone
any
can-
book that fits the criteria.
Okay.
Yep, I have a question. So when I make this motion, seeing that it already has a restriction, would I vote or would I make a motion to restrict or without restriction?
The restriction is.
Because I don't want to take it off the list.
I don't want to preempt our attorney, but the restriction is dictated by Virginia code.
Okay.
So we don't have a choice to unrestrict it in that regard. Does that make sense? So it would be any further restrictions. So it's already restricted because it's restricted by code.
So the motion would be to.
With current restrictions.
With current.
Correct.
Okay.
With current
Yes.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Easy
So-
enough. All right.
If there's no more comments or questions, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we retain this book with its current restrictions, the book being Crank,
Moving it to the full board.
moving it to the full board.
Do I have a second?
I must recuse myself.
Second. Me. All those in favor signify by any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. It will move to the full board for consideration.
Okay, and that is the end of our agenda.
Well, let's go on to meeting 3, shall we?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I second it. All those in favor?
You can't second.
I know. He did.
Second.
We have a motion to adjourn and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting is adjourned.
No discussion.